So hello and welcome to the video. Another pre-dawn start for me today, which tells you that today is going to be something a bit special to have got me up this early, and I am quite looking forward to it. So there are relatively few opportunities anywhere in the world to travel entirely domestically within a country and to finish your journey on a different continent to where you started it. The obvious example is Turkey, where Istanbul spans Europe and Asia. Russia is another example, as you can travel from European Russia to far eastern Russia in Asia, or at least you could. There are a couple of other examples. Why don't you pop your suggestions as to where you may be able to do this down in the comments? I may have missed a few. But the one I'm going to do today might surprise you a little bit, in that I'm going to do it in Spain. Now, Spain has two small enclaves on the continent of Africa, Ceuta, which is actually visible from Gibraltar, and Melilla. Now, I've taken some local advice on how to pronounce those two places, so please forgive me if I have butchered them. So today I'm going to be travelling from here in Seville, entirely domestically within Spain, not going to show anyone my passport, and I'm going to end my journey in Africa, in Melilla. I'm going to take a train from here in Seville down to Malaga, which should take a couple of hours, then I've got a couple of hours to kill in Malaga before taking a ferry, which in 5 or 6 hours will cross the Mediterranean down to that enclave surrounded by Morocco. Really excited about today's journey. I could have flown. It would have taken about 40 minutes and it would have actually cost me a lot less than I've paid for these two journeys today. But it's going to be a bit of an adventure, and how often can you travel by land and sea entirely domestically within a country and end up on a different continent? So if you'd like to see how this goes, stick around.
Hi, I'm Matt. I've lived in 5 countries on 4 continents. I've flown over 1.4 million miles. I've visited over 100 countries, every American state, but I'm nowhere near done. So subscribe to see where I go next and perhaps get some inspiration for your next trip. You can catch a train from a couple of stations in Seville. The main station where I was that morning was Seville Santa Justa. I arrived just before 8 AM, but it was still dark. That part of Spain prefers lighter evenings and darker mornings in early October. There were a few shops and cafes on the concourse, but as the furthest destination from Seville is Madrid, which is about 2.5 hours away, no truly epic rail journeys will start from here, and the facilities probably reflect that.
When I booked this trip, I guess I was gambling that Spain would have eased its domestic transport mask mandate, but it hasn't. So I face the prospect of making both of these journeys, train and a ferry, wearing a mask. I know that's triggering to some of you who watch my videos. I don't love it, but I guess you just got to follow the rules.
I purchased and printed my ticket in advance directly from Renfe, the Spanish railway operator, and there was a ticket check before you could access the platform. Spain operates airport-style security checks before you board intercity trains. Airport-style, as you don't need to worry about liquids and the like, and it was quick and easy. Then another ticket check. You don't need to worry too much about getting on the wrong train when travelling in Spain. My ticket cost €47 one way to Malaga, which for a 2-hour trip I thought was quite a lot. At the time, Spain was running a cost of living promotion whereby regular commuter trips were being discounted and potentially could even be had for free. I've seen some people that have gamed that promotion to get a discount on a tourist journey, but it was quite a complicated process that required a higher level of Spanish language skills than I could muster. I might have saved €25 had I persevered, but it wasn't in the spirit of the promotion, and I was relatively happy to pay the full amount. And I did get a seat reservation with my booking. And it was a decent seat, not extravagant legroom, but a solid, sizable table, and the seat was quite comfortable. Seats were available in pairs or quads, although there was no table in the quad section. This was a middle distance service with a middle distance train. Lengthier journeys on higher speed trains offer slightly plusher accommodation. No personal events, but there were reading lights, which didn't work. No power by the seat, but you did get to share a small bin with your seatmate. So it was time to mask up. Every other passenger wore a mask, seemingly without complaint. and we left Seville absolutely bang on time, still in the dark, but dawn started to break as we passed through Seville's northern suburbs. The route taken by the train was a little odd. We first headed to Cordoba on the high-speed line before kind of doubling back on ourselves and heading down to Malaga on another high-speed track. There is an alternative, more direct routing, which takes longer and, perhaps oddly, costs more than this route. But we passed through some pretty scenery as the sun rose, and after about an hour we reached Cordoba. I'd say that 90% of passengers got off here, which perhaps shouldn't have surprised me, as this would be the prime commuter train for people living in Seville. And, as has happened to me on a few times on Spanish trains, we reversed out of the station and headed towards Malaga, going backwards. Stressing about getting a forward-facing seat on Spanish railways may not be so important. For this second leg, which also took about an hour, the sun was up and I was able to explore the train with the benefit of some natural light. The train was made up of 4 carriages, all offering the same class of travel and seating configurations. It was perhaps 60% full from Cordoba to Malaga. I was surprised to find no catering on the train whatsoever, no buffet car and no trolley service. The advice obviously being to provision what you might need for the journey before boarding. The toilet was functional, with a design aesthetic that communicated durability rather than luxury. But it was clean-ish and had the accessories you might need, so was absolutely fit for purpose in my books. We enjoyed some attractive Spanish scenery as we headed south through the valleys north of Malaga, and bang on time pulled into Malaga's Maria Zambrano station, where longer distance trains terminate in the city. So off the train into the station, which has quite a pleasant shopping mall built over the top of it. I had about 4 hours to kill before my ferry departed, so I found a quiet corner of the food court upstairs and did some editing. Ferries to Spain's other enclave of Ceuta depart from Algeciras, close to Gibraltar. You can get a ferry to Melilla from Malaga, Motril or Almeria, although Malaga was by far the most convenient for me, even if it involved the longest sea crossing. The port is actually really close to the centre of Malaga, so it would not have been a difficult hike from there even with luggage, but it was close to a mile from the railway station, so I paid about €5 for a cab. I checked in online and printed off what I thought was a boarding pass, but it's always best to double check. I managed to attract an agent's attention and I was indeed upgraded to an official boarding pass. I'd seen that the ship had capacity for over 1,200 people, so I was anticipating a bit of a scrum, but when boarding started an hour before sailing time, I started to sense that we may well be sailing at a bit less than full capacity. I said that my passport wouldn't be checked on this trip. I needed ID here, so I actually did have to use it. You get a heavily discounted fare if you are a resident of Melilla, so IDs were being scrutinised quite closely for revenue protection reasons. I'd estimate that the vast majority of passengers that day were residents returning home. Another security checkpoint, and again airport style in that my liquids weren't measured. Up and around and on to the ship, the catchily named Autonomous City of Melilla. Capacity for 1,250 passengers and 140 cars. Quite conveniently, us foot passengers could leave our larger luggage in a lock-up cage on one of the car decks adjacent to the gangway. I was a little surprised that quite a few passengers were collecting keycards to cabins. The ship sailed at 2:30 in the afternoon, arriving around 9 p.m, so there was no real need for a bed, but as cabins were heavily discounted for Melilla residents, many seemed to take that option. I'd paid an extra €10 for access to the VIP lounge, so I collected a keycard for that room. You'll notice crew and some of the passengers wearing a mask. Despite the ferry being a form of Spanish public transport, and so wearing a mask was supposed to be obligatory on the date I travelled, there was no enforcement, and when we left Malaga I didn't see any of the passengers or crew wearing them. There were a number of quite substantial public areas up on deck. The ship was built in 2001 and had gathered a reasonable amount of rust over the years, but there was still considerably more metal than rust in the areas I inspected. Nice views back over Malaga. The most unexpected feature was an indoor pool, closed on my voyage, but it looked like quite a nice space and would have offered a great way to pass the time. particularly as there was also a bar in that area too. The lower passenger deck contained the passenger cabins, none of which I got to see inside, sadly. A cabin upgrade would have cost me over £100 as a non-resident, which I just couldn't justify on a daytime crossing. The upper passenger deck offered the majority of the facilities. There were plenty of lounge areas, many of which were locked up, which was another indication that we'd be lightly loaded that afternoon. A few groups, including some with kids, had built small camps for the crossing. That made excellent sense, as you create a way to pass the time and a level of comfort you could create for yourself, and at the same time you give the kids something to do. I didn't really capture it on film, but when I boarded it looked like the restaurant was being set up for service. Either I was mistaken, or the crew received the final passenger manifest and decided not to bother, as it remained closed for the crossing. There were bars at the front and back of the ship, or the bow and the stern if you prefer. A beer could be had for less than €3, and you could also buy sandwiches and other snacks at the bar if you hadn't brought your own. Melilla is not in the EU customs area and has no VAT, so there was a duty-free shop aboard. Not great value, but the bottles did make a very relaxing noise as they rattled together. There were also snacks available for purchase in the shop. I mentioned I'd paid €10 for access to the VIP lounge. I guess I was concerned that the ship would be standing room only, ha ha. The room I could access was quite comfortable and did offer seating with a far higher degree of recline than you could find elsewhere. There were TVs which were on, which you'd think wouldn't be conducive to sleeping, but it actually created a sort of white noise that was not unpleasant. The biggest problem though was the temperature. The room was kept at an uncomfortably high temperature, which once again may have helped you sleep, but I very much preferred sitting elsewhere in more clement temperatures. Probably €10 wasted. So I had 6.5 hours to kill on a virtually empty ship. 6.5 hours is quite a long time. I found a comfy seat with legroom and an adjacent plug and did quite a few hours editing. I had a couple of beers and spent a bit of time watching the waves. The weather was very pleasant, even in the middle of the Mediterranean. And I wandered around a bit, hoping that something interesting would happen. It didn't. I love cruising, and if you don't know, I have a channel dedicated to my cruise adventures. The link will be in the description below. I think I'd hoped that this experience would at least create some vaguely cruisy vibes, but the complete lack of energy from my fellow passengers on the ship made it a bit of a slog, if I'm completely honest. We saw the African coastline as night fell and pulled into Melilla bang on schedule. As we gathered at the exit door, I reckon everyone who was aboard was gathered in one place, meaning I could count the passenger load. And I reckon there were 62 people on a ship with a capacity for 1,250. 63 people if you include the one lorry driver I'd spotted aboard who'd already gone downstairs to get into his vehicle. And off the ship into a warm Melilla evening. I'll make a video about what I found there, as it was a very interesting experience, so look out for that in the next few weeks. Perhaps consider subscribing if you've not already, and ding the notification bell so YouTube will tell you when my videos go live. I paid €68 for my crossing, plus €10 for the VIP lounge, which is about £65 in total. It was an experience, to say the least, and I very much enjoyed the train and the ferry elements. But the inescapable fact is that the journey cost me over £100 and took 13 hours, and I could have flown directly to Melilla from Seville in about an hour and would have paid less to do so. But I did travel entirely within one country and ended the journey on a different continent to the one I started on. So thanks for watching, give this video a pity like for the investment of time I've made in making it, and leave me a comment. Are you mad enough to consider travelling this way? And if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, I have a Patreon account, the link to which is in the description below. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.